Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. I'm Joey Van Zummeren, one of your reporters here, joined by Michael Stamps, as always, as Mizzou football comes off a loss to South Carolina, looking ahead to their final road trip of the season at Mississippi State. And the Mizzou men's basketball entering a three-game stretch here. They got to start off with Pacific on Friday night, and then leading up to that December month where they have three Power 5 teams before their start to SEC play with California, Kansas, and Illinois, obviously. So a lot going on in the world of Mizzou sports. We're going to start off with football as usual. Michael, how are you feeling about this Mizzou football team after that loss to South Carolina?
I mean, I feel like the only way to word that one is heartbreaking. And I feel like I said this in our post-game show. I'm not quite sure, but you can only win so many games, in the fashion that Missouri's been winning. It's been close game after close game. And, not that they haven't deserved those games down the stretch because they've done a lot of things right to win those games down the stretch. Against you look back to Boston College, narrow one, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, Auburn. I mean, like they did things that would, warranted them winning those football games in the second half or in the fourth quarter. Not saying they didn't, but I think a lot of things went their way as well. A lot of the other teams shooted themselves in the foot. I mean, Oklahoma, that Jackson Arnold fumble, good hit, but throw the ball away, right? Vanderbilt, make that field goal. Game keeps going. So, they've gotten some help in some of these games, and I'm not coming out and calling Missouri the luckiest team in college football, but they've had some things go their way, and you don't always win those close games. And I know it seems like that's what Eli Drinkwitz prides himself on and prides his team on, is being a team that's going to take you down to the fourth quarter and grit it out and find a way to win. And that's great and all, but that's not always the best method of winning football games. And I think that, was on display against South Carolina, and they did a lot of things right in the fourth quarter and in the second half, and the offense finally started to click a little bit. Some downhill passing. Nate Noel obviously did his thing. So, you find Luther Bird a little bit. The offense looked fine, give or take. Defense didn't do their best, but they didn't, have everything go their way like some of these other games have, and they lost. So, point being, you can only win so many games in the fashion that Missouri has been winning these. Did a lot of things right, but just, not enough. And I believe Drinkwitz said, on Tuesday, they just needed one more play on offense, one more play on defense. And I feel like that's a pretty solid description. One more stop. If they sack Lenore Sellers, if Johnny Walker, sacks Lenore Sellers and said he gets a first down, looking at a different ball game. So not everything went their way. That's football. A lot of positives from it, though.
Now, Mizzou did stay at number 23 in the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings. A lot of people outside of the Mizzou fandom questioning that, and I don't have any problem with the idea of like a team not automatically dropping out with a loss. Like if they look like a good team that deserves to be in the top 25, then keep them in there. But my thing has always been, I don't think they really had shown enough to be at number 23 in the first place. I thought they looked really good against South Carolina, but they dropped out of both the AP and coaches poll. And it's still difficult of what to really make of this team. And I was thinking earlier this week of like how much of a disappointment is this season actually for Mizzou fans. And overall, like I think I know Mizzou fans before the season were expecting a letdown. I mean, their expectations were the 12-team playoff, but there was still that voice in the back of their mind of that, with how Mizzou's history has been of one great season that seems to be building up to another great year. The next year, it's kind of a letdown, and it's difficult to say because I think at the start of the season, even when they were soaring in the rankings, they were number 6 in the college football or the AP rankings at one point, which is just crazy to think about now. And I think a lot of that though was off of last year's success and the fact that they were returning a lot of those pieces. And so the fact that they were number 6 at one point and controlled their own destiny to a certain extent in week 3, as most teams do, I think is disappointing. And the fact that the offense really took a big step down is a big disappointment. The fact that it's the last year of Brady Cook and Luther Burden, and that Brady is dealing with injury still, that they aren't going to go on this illustrious run, even if it's just making the playoffs in the very first year of the 12-team playoff. I think it's going to be disappointing when fans look back on it in a few years, and already is now. I think the fact that both of the times where Mizzou got to show themselves on a big stage absolutely collapsed, I think it's going to be disappointing for fans to look back on. But at the end of the day, it's that mixed with taking aside or putting aside the expectations, because honestly, that does color a lot of how this team is judged. If they started the year unranked, and if they had the same expectations that they did entering the 2023 season, for example, I still think it would be a disappointment because that 2023 team was better. But I guess maybe not a disappointment, but people would be a little more impressed, a little more happy with this outcome. Again, their expectations coming off of last year colors a lot of this, and I've seen a lot of people talking about the touchdown pass that Brady Cook has to Luther Burden there with 70 seconds left on 4th and 6, and just talking about how much of a moment that could have been in their careers. It would have been right up there with the 4th and 17 pass against Florida. Maybe it would have even ranked above it, depending on what this win over South Carolina would have done for them. And now it's kind of just, it's still an amazing play. It's going to be in their career highlight reels. Probably going to be one of the last great plays fans remember that duo making. But ultimately, the fact that it didn't get them the win, didn't set them up for whatever they would have done in these last 2-3 games here is going to be disappointing for fans to look back on. So, I would be interested in how the team themselves feel about it, because obviously in the media, they're always talking about messaging is we don't pay attention to expectations. We know we have to win every game. They were talking about before the season, they were not focused on the playoffs at all, but that was clearly the goal for them. And I playoff or bust seems a little bit dramatic, but it was a little bit of that, I would say. Even Eli Drinkwitz, even if he talks about in his press conference, we're taking about one game at a time. We don't care about the playoffs. Then he goes out there post-game after Oklahoma and says, we're still in the playoff hunt. He tells ESPN in the profile that they do on him that they're looking to make the college football playoff for the first time in program history. They cared about it, and they knew that they very well could have made it if they played up to expectations. Again, they were number 6 ranked team in the country at one point in the season. And so I think you could see a little bit of that disappointment, maybe not disappointment, but realization hitting this team after this South Carolina game, specifically with Brady Cook and Johnny Walker, and just especially with Brady Cook's quote about having to realize for himself personally that he's not going to get much more of these opportunities, and that even if it's 2 meaningless games against Mississippi State and Arkansas that isn't going to get them into the playoffs ultimately, that he's only going to play 2 college football games for the rest of his life. And especially for, I don't know what Brady Cook's future in football looks like, coaching, playing wise, but just that outside of him too, a lot of these guys, very few of these guys are ever going to play football again after playing it all their lives. In these last 2 games, I think reality hit them in this last one of just realizing how much that they have to, as Brady put it, play for themselves, not in a selfish way, not by making dumb mistakes that cost the team, but just realizing how special these moments are. So, yeah, I just felt like reality had set in for this team after the South Carolina loss. Michael, any thoughts on that? I saw, did you have something to say about where they are in the rankings?
I wasn't even paying attention to it when they released, and I was slightly surprised to still see their name there. I'm sure you can make an argument for and against it. I was more reacting to the general reaction on Twitter, because that gave me a good laugh. Not that, scrolling through Twitter threads is ever healthy for anybody, but I got some good humor out of that. In a very broad sense, like as someone who comes from Nebraska and grew up around Nebraska football, and has some rooting interest there, that's a fan base that's used to disappointment and used to having high expectations. So I think I mean, when you come into a season, and I think I've said this in previous episodes too, there's a general idea that if you return a lot of the talent you had from a good team the following season, you're just automatically going to be good. And I mentioned this in college basketball. There was a season where North Carolina made the Final Four. Maybe it was the national title game as a 9 seed, and they turn around the next year, the number 1 team in the country preseason, and they don't even make the tournament, or they're either that or they're really bad. There's this general idea that returning talent and bringing in new talent and replacing it or improving on paper automatically means you're just going to be a better team, and that I think there's a general idea that this Missouri team is going to be better than what they were last year, and clearly that wasn't the case. It does, and I'm not super well versed on the history of the Missouri football fan base, but it does seem like there's a general idea and concept that they are used to the disappointment and expect the disappointment. So that was definitely there. I wouldn't say that where Missouri's at right now. I don't know if it's predictable or not. I would say it wasn't, because the facts are that, even though you aren't automatically going to get better when you return talent, you returned a high-level quarterback and arguably the best receiver in college football, pretty darn good offensive line, and pretty darn good defense with some key players on it last year. So the tools were there. The tools were there to be better. So it's a little puzzling in that aspect, but you make a good point with Cook and Burden and all these guys who might be playing and probably are playing in their last moments with, Missouri football. And I'm sure there's eligibility questions out there and, who has one more year and that sort of thing. Most of these guys are probably gone. A lot of these guys have NFL hopes, the big names. So I think I made a quote tweet about the burden to Cook, touchdown, because that definitely had potential to be a pretty darn good moment too. And I see why people might be disappointed with that as well, because that had, like I said, the potential to be a pretty incredible Missouri football moment. And, there's been a lot of those, especially in the last 2 years. So I think the disappointment and frustration is definitely justified. That being said, there are a lot of football programs that would love a 9-3 or, a 3-loss season. That's why I brought up Nebraska, because I feel like they've been, begging for a 9-win season or a 3-loss season for quite some time now. And it doesn't always fall that way. So, and there's 2 seasons or 1 season under the Eli Drinkwitz era that were bad, 6-win, or not bad, but 6-win seasons. So there's clear improvement, not just the football, but the program as a whole and the culture as a whole. I feel like Eli Drinkwitz has made significant progress in that area, and he's also doing a pretty good job bringing talent too, obviously. So, is there a reason to be disappointed because of the expectations before the season? Yes, but generally a 9-win season's a 9-win season. They're going to get a pretty good bowl game, even though it's not a college football playoff. So disappointment's justified, but there's a lot to hang your hat on this season for players, coaches, and then hopefully the fans. But I feel like at this point we know how college football fans are. So there's going to be some frustration there for sure. But I think there's a lot to appreciate, definitely.
Well, what you said about just what builds expectations for a team and the idea of, if you're returning all the same guys, it's going to be the exact same product as the year before. And I think a lot of this offense's problem, this is just guessing on my part. I haven't done a deep enough dive of this, and I don't know offensive football well enough to be able to say this for sure. But you see it happen in the NFL a lot, where after a team puts a year of tape out there, where in the first year under a new coordinator, new head coach, new quarterback, where they excel in offense, and then second year when the defenses have a season of tape to look back on, an off season to look back at that tape, then things become a lot more difficult for that offense. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's a little bit what's happening to Missouri with Kirby Moore in the second year as offensive coordinator. And also the idea of the transfer portal building up expectations too, because obviously coaches and teams and players themselves are still learning exactly how the transfer portal plays into building a team. And I think because most guys that are transferring, I mean, they're the guys at the top that are transferring because of disputes with the coach, whatever, just not liking the situation they're in, but are getting playing time, doing good, meeting their expectations that they were built up to as a recruit. Those guys at the top that are transferring meet that, but a lot of the guys in the middle and the bottom of the transfer portal are transferring because they weren't getting the playing time they were looking for. And I'm not calling any players lazy for any of that. Transfer portal is such a nuanced topic, but like a lot of the guys that you're getting are kind of unknown commodities. So when the only thing fan base, the media has to look at is what a star recruit they were ranked out of high school, then obviously, I mean, it's going to generate a lot of excitement. But also, it's been a year or two since they were rated that. It's been a year or two since they took a football field, and sometimes it proves to be that maybe they were not getting playing time for a reason. And I'm not saying that applies to any of Missouri's guys. I don't know how they were doing at their former schools, but I would just say I feel like the transfer portal additions, I'm not going to call any out specifically and label them as disappointments, but I would definitely say people would be surprised at the start of the season if you told them that by week 12 of the season, Toriano Pride would be getting a significantly less playing time than Nick DeLoach. And Pride was, again, he was a 4 or 5-star out of high school from East St. Louis. So a lot of excitement generated there. And that's the only thing people have to rely on. And ultimately, it's not a bad thing that Nick DeLoach is playing over him. Ultimately, it's great that Mizzou was able to develop that talent in Nick DeLoach, who was another guy that they recruited. But again, it's generating that excitement because of what Toriano was marketed as. Same with Caden Green at one point in the season being rotated with Mitch Walters. He had a few struggles there at the start of the season. But again, marked as 4-star prospect out of high school, committed to Oklahoma, big time school. So people have a lot of expectations for him. And then same Marcus Carroll even in the past few weeks, Jamal Roberts getting more playing time from him. And I think that's mostly based off of play style and what they needed in the absence of Nate Noel. But basically the whole point in this is transfer portal, getting those new fresh players generates a lot of excitement, but it's hard to actually know what they have. And Eli Jenkins said this before, actually know what they have until they take the field. Now, the opposite side of that is Corey Flagg, who didn't get a lot of playing time last year for Miami, playing for Missouri this year and looking incredible, being one of their best players on the defense. So interesting, just looking at the expectations they had at the start of this year. And like you said, though, Michael, looking ahead to next year, and we've talked about this before, this program still has momentum. Even, if they made the college football playoff, it would be amplified, but this program still has momentum, especially compared to where they were 2 years ago. If Drinkwitz can continue to recruit the way he has been, and next year's team's going to look, I would say right now, pretty different. I think they're going to retain a lot of their role guys, but they're losing their starting quarterback. Anybody's guess who's going to be starting quarterback for them next year. They're losing their top wide receiver who really started this turning the page for them in Luther Burden when he committed, losing their top 2 running backs. But I would say at every position that they're losing talent at, there's a lot of exciting talent there that they just have to develop. And that's the exciting thing to watch. I think it's going to be exciting spring session to watch for Mizzou football, just see what guys are really standing out, what guys are getting the most opportunities. So looking forward to that part of it.
One more thing. Sorry. Yeah. I think now we get to the point of the year where the transfer portal does open up in a couple of weeks. I believe it's early middle December. And that's when all the craziness starts, obviously. And there's no telling like who Missouri or any team is going to bring in. I think there is a truth to the fact that there's going to be more exciting positions to bring in players at. I mean, maybe the quarterback spot. Who knows what that looks like, but that could be a focus. You're going to lose Luther Burden and Theo Weiss at receiver. Might be openings there. You're going to lose Marcus Carroll, Nate Noel. Might be openings at the running back spot. So there's going to be some exciting holes to fill. But I think now we're at a point in college athletics, not just you look at football and probably basketball too, but any sport in general, that the most impressive coaches now can A, retain talent, and B, develop it. And you mentioned earlier, Nick DeLoach, only his second year with the program, but he's already looking like one of the best, could be one of the best defensive players on this team. Jamal Roberts, Kewan Lacey, even Tavares Jones at running back. Roberts and Lacey have looked very good in recent weeks, and pretty minimal snaps. Roberts a little more, obviously, but they're looking like they could be the future of that running back room. The list of receivers goes on, and we saw Trajan Greco and Nicholas Rodriguez earlier in the week at the press conference, and they've both made impacts in games this year. So I think now it's time for Eli Drinkwitz to show that he can continue to develop these guys and get them to stay. That's the biggest thing, because now more than ever, if you have young guys who are playing at a high level and you're not a Georgia, Alabama, Texas, all your major schools, those schools are looking to take your players and give them more money. So keeping guys like Roberts and Lacey and Rodriguez and Greco and DeLoach and all these young guys, keeping them on your roster is going to be more important than ever, because they look like cornerstones and key players for the future of this football team.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever program can really crack the code on that first is just going to create a dynasty, really, you would think. And I just don't know how you can have depth on a roster now. And I think, it's completely changing, obviously, but just the fact that guys understandably get impatient, right? Like, it's hard to blame them, honestly, but how you are able to, recruiting the guys isn't really the problem, but developing them, getting them to stay, to be role players, and role players are really important. Obviously, the stars are going to make the big plays, but role players, competitive depth, like Eli Drinkwitz is always talking about, is important to your team. So we'll see what moves Mizzou makes in the transfer portal this season and what guys they end up losing. Last year, for all that I just talked about, it was a successful year for them last year, at least by star rankings, and they were able to get a few good contributors out of it. So yeah, the quarterback one is obviously going to be the really interesting one to watch. It's hard to imagine, even no matter what they feel about Drew Pine, no matter what they feel about Sam Horn, and I guess, Aiden Glover's really just a project. Don't know where they really see him fitting into the future. And then you got Matt Zollers coming in this fall as well, but he's not really into the equation of who's starting at quarterback next fall. But going to be some interesting names out there. Jackson Arnold seems like one of them. That'd be really interesting for the Oklahoma-Mizzou rivalry next year. But yeah, like I said, there's really no guessing. It's hard. It's not like NFL free agency where you can really pencil in anybody. There's too many schools, too many factors that play into it. So we'll have to see what moves Mizzou ends up making there. Any final thoughts on this football team, Michael, before we talk about Mizzou basketball?
Mississippi State's not, they're towards the bottom of the SEC. They are the bottom of the SEC. Probably the most winnable SEC game they've had all year. Part of that, quote unquote easy schedule that, they had coming into this year. So, you have to think they go and handle business, but I think at this point now we know this Missouri team doesn't make anything easy at all, and anything could happen. And it's not like Mississippi State is bad. If you put them in another conference, You put them in the Big 12, ACC. I mean, any of those, I'm sure they can go and win you more than a couple football games. More than 2 football games. They have a lot of talent and a lot of young talent. So, I mean, should be a win in theory. But like I said, it's never easy with this Missouri team. So, I mean, don't want to get anybody's hopes up by saying that. But, this looks like a very winnable football game that should be a nice confidence booster heading into, season finale or regular season finale against Arkansas at home.
Yeah, that game against Arkansas should be a good one. But with this one, yeah, Michael Van Buren Jr., freshman starting at quarterback for Mississippi State. He has 5 interceptions on the year, but 9 touchdowns, had a solid showing against a few teams there. I mean, he threw for 300 yards against Arkansas. They have 2 rushers with over 500 yards, and then the big offense playmaker for them, Kevin Coleman Jr. of St. Mary's High School out of St. Louis. So, yeah, like you mentioned, Michael, they're any other conference. We're not getting paid by Greg Sankey to say this, but any other conference, Mississippi State would probably have a better record than 2-8 on the year. But yeah, hey man, I mean, they had at practice this Tuesday, they had assistants waving cowbells at practice to really simulate that environment down there in Starkville. So
yeah, if that's not preparation, I don't know what is. I mean, that has to get a football team ready to play.
Well, hey, it's a shame nobody in practice said, or nobody in the press conferences this week said, I think our cowbells are actually louder in practice than the ones they have at Mississippi State. That would have really, then we could have got a little more Twitter interest in this one.
Yeah, milk it a little bit for sure.
No bait. On to this Mizzou basketball team. Now heading into, like I said, at the top here, heading into not the final stretch of non-conference play, but heading into this final bit of play before things pick up for their season. Obviously, they have the matchup with Kansas coming up soon, November 8th or December 8th. They play California on December 3rd, and then they play Illinois on December 22nd, or right before Christmas time, a few days before then. I mean, Illinois looked pretty good against Alabama last night. So with this team here, playing Pacific on Friday, it was interesting. We heard from Dennis Gates today, and one of the things he talked about, was asked about, was the longer lineups he uses. And that's obviously been a question a lot of Mizzou fans' mind. I would say even ever since he's got here. I'm sure he's been asked about it at some point. But, you can think whatever you want about his reasoning, but this reason he gave, he said just the depth to have there to limit or keeping guys fresh, the depth for injuries, and then he said intensifying your practices where you have guys that I think, kind of what Eli Drinkwitz always talks about during the fall, especially competition at every position, where if you have the opportunity, if you have the opportunity to actually get playing time, you're going to go all that much harder in practice. So interesting to hear from him there. Also interesting he talked a little bit about the growth and development of both Marcus Allen and Anthony Robinson. We talked a little bit about Marcus Allen and just how he's kind of standing out amongst the rest of the freshmen early on. And then Anthony Robinson, I believe before this past game, he wasn't in the starting lineup for a game, but he was consistently getting over 20 minutes of play in each one. And this case has really focused in on Anthony being able to grow as a leader. Caleb Grill talked about him today, saying that he's kind of a older sibling to those freshmen that are coming in. Michael, just your thoughts on this Mizzou basketball team right now.
Yeah, I thought what Gates said about the longer rotations and intensifying practices is really fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense. The more good players you have at practice, the more you're going to be able to push each other and evidently and eventually play better. But it would be interesting to know if that's a thing he recruits for, is maybe these freshmen aren't going to play right away, but they can contribute in practice and that sort of thing. Dennis Gates played 15 guys off the starters and bench included last year, and it was very puzzling at times. I feel like I'm less puzzled to start the season than I was last year, because it seems like this year there are people who are actually standing out, both as starters and coming off the bench. Tony Perkins has been in and out of the starting lineup. Him and Ant Robinson have, I think it's 2-2 for games started. Obviously, Perkins has had a couple injuries and sounds like he's, day to day. Gates said he practiced before Mississippi State, just precautionary. So no confirmation on if we'll see him against Pacific today or tomorrow, whenever this comes out, but no confirmation there. But, seems like he's headed in the right direction. But regardless, Robinson, if he's coming off the bench, which seems like that might be the case, he's, like you said, earned himself a role. Aiden Shaw earned himself a role. Gets a little murky from there, but Allen's earned himself a role. Marquez Warwick had his best scoring night against Mississippi Valley State. Caleb Grill's coming off the bench. Don't know how long that's going to be the case, if they want to keep Boateng in there or not, but Grill definitely has a role on this team. And then you get into Trent Pierce. You get into, like I said, Marcus Allen, maybe Jacob Cruz, maybe Peyton Marshall. But there are guys off the bench who are proving themselves valuable to this team and have a clear, defined role. And I think that was an issue last year. There was 8, 9, 10 talented players on that bench unit that could start any given night, which they did. It was all over the place all season. But some of them never really, carved out a role. You look at a guy like, Trent Pierce last year. Clearly the talent was there, but just never really put together. Jordan Butler, who's now playing for South Carolina, he transferred. Clearly a talented player, modern, NBA big man, can run the court or run the floor, can shoot, block shots, a little thinner, talented player for sure. Never really found his role. So a lot of guys who are definitely had the talent. This entire roster is very talented. Same last year, just seemed like people struggled to define themselves on the team. This year, I think that's more of the case. Ant Robinson is excellent defender. The pace at which he plays and the way he moves the offense at a high speed and transition, I think makes him one of the most valuable players on this team. And, depending on the health of Tony Perkins and how Perkins continues to play compared to Robinson, might be a bit of a battle there. In my opinion, I think Robinson has been absolutely excellent so far. And then Shaw, smaller, forward or center, but clearly can play alongside Mark Mitchell. And he's clearly evolved his offensive game. Pierce has showed he can hit some triples. Outside of that first game, has been a little streaky. Seemed like he was kind of in the doghouse after that. Don't really know what happened there, but he earned playing time against Mississippi Valley State. So a lot of guys showed that they have a role, and they've improved from last year to this year, which at the end of the day is the most important thing. So definitely some more defined roles in this rotation that's going to go a long way. Going back to that depth into the important stretch of non-con and then SEC play.
Yeah, again, everything you mentioned there is what I'm just looking to see this team actually put together. Of last year, like you said, they had some talented pieces. I think they have more abundance of that this year with the guys that they've developed and the guys they've acquired now. But just actually finding an actual team is going to be the challenge for them and Coach Gates in this one. And obviously, and I think that's why a lot of people are confused, sometimes angry with the rotations, where it's just like, how do you, the question of can you actually find rhythm with that? Can you find consistency with that, with the right combination of guys? So like I said, we'll see how this team is able to put it together over these last stretch of 3 games here in November. Yeah, and then starting off December with California. So that's going to round it out for us today on the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you tune into our coverage. The rest of what we got going on: Mississippi State football this Saturday, and then Mizzou basketball. Like I said, that stretch of 3 games here coming up. So we appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk to you later.